Doug, Donald Trump's speech, the longest congressional address in modern presidential history, an hour and 40 minutes. There's a lot to talk about here, but I just want to start with your broad take first. What struck you the most?
What struck me the most is that we have never really seen a speech as combative, I would say aggressive, and defiant by a U.S. president before a joint session of Congress ever in the history of the nation. Look, in the 6 weeks since Donald Trump has come to power, sure, there's been some pushback, right? And there's been, across the world, there's been a lot of shock and awe. Especially here in Europe. In the U.S., there have been legal challenges against a lot of his executive orders, directives to slash the federal government, to upend the way government works, to dismantle essentially the federal bureaucracy as Americans know it. And there's even been talk among some of his critics of what they call an auto coup, a self-coup in the U.S. The U.S. essentially scoring an own goal, dismantling its own democracy, dismantling its own government. So the climate coming into this speech is that, essentially, and a very divided chamber, obviously. Donald Trump not only owned his record, he was relentlessly boastful of what he has done. He basically said that, this has been the most thrilling days, his first 6 weeks in power, in American history. And he's basically said, and we're just getting started. So there's more of this to come. He cited his own figures of 100 executive orders, 400 executive actions. His speech was marked by vociferous lauding praises to himself and his actions, swift and relentless action to dismantle what came before him, and at the same time openly panning and aggressively going after anyone who he sees as an opponent. That is, anyone who has dared to maybe, even in whatever terms, to criticize Donald Trump. He was surrounded by, yes, all of these types of addresses. They're always partisan. You always have the party in power clapping, applauding, giving standing ovations to the president addressing them of their party. You always have the opposition, usually sometimes applauding, usually just sitting quietly listening. This was clearly a break with that. This was rapturous applause from the Republicans. There's been zero pushback from Republicans in Congress, really, just about from any of them in these first 43 days of Donald Trump in power. And the rapturous applause really underscored. You had a feeling looking at it. I worked in the former Soviet Union when you used to see these old Soviet Communist Party congresses, or even today in today's North Korea or Chinese Communist Party congresses, where everyone sort of in lockstep, cheers the great leader. Yeah, it sounds like an exaggeration. Come on, Doug, you're not comparing the U.S. to North Korea and the Soviet Union and to China. No, I'm not. It's not a direct comparison. But there's the makings of that atmosphere, this uncritical, unquestioning, rapturous embrace of a leader that no one dares to oppose. That was the climate, and that's what struck me most in this address.
Now, Trump actually spent very little time laying out any new policy, particularly any new foreign policy. He did talk briefly about Ukraine, and this, of course, just days after that explosive encounter in the White House. What did he have to say about that?
Yeah, I'll get to Ukraine in 1 second. You're right about foreign policy. It got short shrift in this speech. You often, people say you can judge the importance that an administration assigns to any given issue by the time it allots to that issue in these types of, this wasn't a State of the Union, it was a speech to Congress, but in these types of speeches, he devoted by that measure the most time to Greenland, saying one way or another we will get it, sort of making an appeal to the people of the great people of Greenland, to basically decide for their own, but ultimately we will get Greenland. So this has been a big topic of the new Trump administration. On Ukraine, he reread the letter, a letter which some people have said sound like, Zelensky groveling, desperately trying to keep the American president on side after that disastrous meeting in the White House in which he was publicly berated, humiliated essentially by Donald Trump and his vice president, J.D. Vance. Donald Trump called it an important letter. He read it. So in a sense there, it was a Trumpian way of signaling that perhaps something can get done. But in the same breath, the next breath, he says, but we've also gotten very strong signals from Moscow that they're ready to make peace. And then lumping it all together, false equivalency between Ukraine and Russian responses, wouldn't that be beautiful? I will note that he gave almost zero mention to Gaza, Israel-Palestinian conflict, obviously, and the ongoing war in Gaza and the teetering ceasefire, nothing really. So like I said, maybe it shows where his priorities right now, where his mind is at. But it was a boastful speech, and he was trying to hammer away at what he sees as his big themes, these expansionist themes of the new America.
All right, Doug, thank you so much.